Unaware his wife was the multi-billionaire who bought the very company his parents worked for, he signed the divorce papers with a smug grin, believing he had finally escaped the ordinary woman who'd once lived in his shadow. He emptied their $100 million joint account to fund a lavish new life with his mistress, boasting that he'd traded up. But he had no idea the woman he abandoned owned everything he touched, from his parents' paychecks to the mansion he planned to keep. She watched silently as he celebrated his betrayal, her silence richer than revenge, her power hidden behind the calm in her eyes. When she finally moved, everything he called his vanished. But who exactly was the woman he underestimated? How did she build an empire so vast it swallowed his entire world? And why did her revenge leave not just him, but everyone he loved homeless? He didn't look back when he threw her out of the penthouse that evening. The slam of the door was final, deliberate, the punctuation mark on years of subtle disdain. He stood tall, proud in his designer suit, the kind she used to iron for him before board meetings, before love became an afterthought buried beneath ambition. She stood motionless in the hallway, the city lights from the glass elevator flickering across her tear-streaked face. But the tears weren't weakness. They were the final echo of a role she was done playing. When he drove away, she didn't chase. She didn't scream. She simply stood there, barefoot on marble, her breath calm, her mind precise. The silence that followed wasn't defeat. It was transformation, somewhere between heartbreak and revelation. Something ancient and powerful in her awakened. The quiet part of her that had built empires while pretending to be small. The invisible heiress finally stepped into her own reflection. Inside the penthouse, her absence was immediate, like the air had been sucked out. His mistress laughed too loud, poured champagne on the white rug, and whispered about renovations. He called her baby in the same tone he once reserved for his wife. But unlike the woman he'd discarded, this one didn't understand the architecture of wealth or the discipline of silence. She understood only the surface, the shimmer without the depth. And that, he thought, was enough. He didn't notice that the chauffeur who drove them that night was hers, that the penthouse lease he believed was his signature on bore her company's logo, that even the credit card he used to celebrate his freedom was linked to an account she allowed him to manage for appearance's sake. He believed in his own narrative, self-made, deserving, unstoppable. In the quiet of her new apartment, one she owned through a shell company she'd established years before, she sat on the edge of the bed and opened a small box. Inside were photographs from a past life, her grandfather smiling beside her as a teenager, his wrinkled hands resting over hers as he'd handed her the letter that changed everything. Power, he'd written, is most honestly revealed when hidden. Learn who loves you when you appear powerless. She had inherited a conglomerate the world envied, a labyrinth of holdings across tech, finance, and real estate. But her grandfather's will had demanded anonymity, no titles, no publicity, no inheritance disclosure for 5 years. Only after that could she publicly step into her role. And so she lived quietly, married the man she believed in, supported his dreams, and built his success brick by brick, testing not just him, but herself. At first he was humble, ambitious but grateful. He used to wake her with coffee, whispering dreams of building something meaningful together. They'd spend nights on their balcony, watching the skyline shimmer while talking about a future bigger than them both. But somewhere along the line, ambition mutated into entitlement. He stopped saying we and started saying I. He forgot that her quiet funding, her unseen calls, and her subtle influence within the company's boardrooms were the wind beneath his so-called rise. She remembered the night it shifted completely. He came home late, the scent of another woman faintly on his jacket. When she confronted him, he laughed, not out of guilt, but arrogance. "You wouldn't understand," he'd said, sipping scotch. "You've never had to fight for anything." The words landed like glass splintering in her chest. He didn't know. He couldn't know. She was the fight, the architect of every door he walked through, believing he'd opened it himself. She had kept the facade alive because of love, because she wanted to believe that the test her grandfather left her could end differently, that love could survive the illusion. But that illusion cracked the moment she found the photographs. Him and the mistress, celebrating with champagne paid for by her own company. That night she didn't cry. She called her lawyer instead, then her assistant, then her chief financial officer. Orders went out quietly. Transfers were made. Accounts were secured. The machine she'd built under the surface began to move. Quiet, precise, unstoppable. By the time dawn arrived, her decision was made. The test was over. He had failed, not just as a husband, but as a man incapable of recognizing the foundation he stood upon. When he told her to get out, she simply looked at him with a calm that unnerved him. "You're right," she said softly. "You need space to see what you really own." He laughed, mistaking her tone for surrender. But she wasn't leaving defeated. She was leaving to reclaim everything that was already hers. That night, as the city hummed below her window, she whispered to herself, not in sorrow but in certainty. "He thinks he's free," she said, "but I built the ground he walks on." And in that whisper, her revenge began. Not loud, not bitter, but inevitable. He woke up the next morning in a suite that wasn't his, sunlight cutting through sheer curtains like judgment. The scent of perfume lingered, expensive, sweet, and cloying. His mistress lay beside him, hair sprawled across white sheets, smiling as though the world finally belonged to them. He smiled back, masking the unease that fluttered under his chest. Today was supposed to be his day. Promotion, control, power. The CEO was retiring and he, the self-proclaimed visionary, was stepping into the light. He didn't know that the light he basked in came from the woman he just cast into darkness. In the mirror, he admired himself. The crisp navy suit, the gold tie clip she had once gifted him. Back when her gift still meant something. He tightened it, not realizing he was adorning himself with the symbol of his undoing. His phone buzzed with messages, congratulations, anticipation, whispers of success. Even his parents texted him, proud of the son who'd made it. They had no idea that their pensions, their very livelihoods, were tied to her company's stocks. At the same hour across the city, she stood before a wall of glass overlooking Manhattan. The morning sun reflected off the skyline, and in that reflection she saw both the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming, calm, deliberate, untouchable. Her assistant waited silently behind her, holding a folder sealed in black leather. "Are the documents ready?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," the assistant replied. "The board will meet at 10. He believes it's for his promotion." She nodded once. "Then let's give him the stage." She turned back to the window, eyes sharp as diamond edges. For years, she'd watched him chase titles, build connections, and craft a persona that looked self-made, but was stitched together by her influence. Every board recommendation, every investment, every door that had opened for him, her quiet approval had made it possible. But he had mistaken support for submission, love for dependence. Today, he'd learned the difference. Her phone buzzed, a private message from her CFO. All accounts secured, transfers complete. He no longer has access. The first piece of his illusion had just evaporated. Meanwhile, in the company's grand lobby, he strutted through the revolving doors, soaking in the admiring glances from employees. The marble floor gleamed. The logo of the conglomerate he thought he'd helped build shining beneath his polished shoes. He greeted the receptionist with charm, shook hands with department heads, exuding the kind of arrogance that comes before the fall. His mistress followed closely, dressed in a red dress too bold for the corporate world, her smile too wide. "You look powerful today," she purred. "I am powerful," he said, his grin cutting wide. "By noon, I'll be in charge." But as the elevator ascended, a flicker of something, call it instinct, call it dread, tightened in his chest. A whisper of her voice echoed in his mind. "You need space to see what you really own." He brushed it off with a smirk. She was probably crying somewhere, he thought, realizing what she'd lost. The conference room was a cathedral of wealth, floor-to-ceiling windows, a massive oak table, and the city sprawling like an empire below. The board members were already seated, eyes sharp, faces unreadable. He took his place near the head, his confidence swelling. The chairman cleared his throat. "We have a few final remarks before the transition," the chairman began. "Our next phase requires vision and accountability. He smiled, ready to deliver his rehearsed speech, but the words froze when the door opened. Every head turned. She entered, not in tears, not broken. She moved like authority personified, tailored black suit, understated jewelry, her hair sleek and poised. The silence that followed was electric. Even the chairman rose instinctively, as if in deference. He blinked. "What are you doing here?" His voice cracked slightly, swallowed by the room's quiet tension. She didn't answer him. Instead, she walked to the far end of the table, the place reserved for the board's controlling shareholder. Then she set down the leather folder her assistant had carried. "Before we proceed," she said, her voice smooth and controlled, "there's been a change in ownership structure that everyone should be aware of." The chairman nodded, deferential. "Of course, Ms." He hesitated, realizing the title now belonged to her. She smiled faintly. "Let's make this brief." She opened the folder and began distributing documents. Silent, precise. Each page bore the company's insignia and a new signature block. Her name. The controlling shares, once obscured behind layers of investment firms and trusts, were revealed as hers. The room exhaled collectively, shock rippling through it. He looked at her, confusion turning to disbelief. This is impossible," he stammered. "You're not even qualified?" She interrupted softly. "Involved? Intelligent enough?" Her tone never rose, but every word sliced clean through the pretense he'd built. "You've been working for me since the day you started here. Every deal, every promotion, you thought you earned them. You didn't. You were a project." The word landed like a verdict. The chairman adjusted his glasses. "Is this accurate?" She nodded once. "I own 58% of the conglomerate. The rest are subsidiaries under my holding company. Effective immediately, I'm assuming full executive control." His throat tightened. "You can't just—" "I can," she said, "and I just did." The room fell silent again. The mistress beside him shifted uncomfortably, her face paling as the implication settled in. She continued, turning a page. "While reviewing financial records, we discovered irregularities. Joint accounts emptied, company funds misused. I've authorized an internal investigation." Gasps murmured through the board. He felt the walls closing in. "This is revenge," he said bitterly, his mask cracking. "You're doing this because I left you." She met his gaze, steady and cold. "No," she said. "I'm doing this because you revealed who you are." The chairman cleared his throat again, formal now, almost apologetic. "Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. Security will escort you out." The words hung like a noose. He stood there, stunned, while she gathered her papers. She didn't look back as she walked out of the conference room. The applause that followed wasn't for him. It was for her. The invisible woman had stepped into the light, and the empire he believed he built had just swallowed him whole. Outside, the city gleamed, unbothered. And as he stood there, stripped of position, status, and illusion, he finally understood what she meant when she said he needed to see what he really owned. Nothing. He stumbled out of the building with security flanking him, the mistress trailing behind as though reality had turned to quicksand beneath her heels. Reporters waited outside, cameras flashing, alerted by someone smarter and faster than him. He tried to shield his face, barking at them that it was a misunderstanding, but every denial sounded like a lie gasping for breath. She didn't witness any of it firsthand. She didn't need to. The collapse had already been orchestrated, each domino placed long before he pushed her away. From the top floor in the office that now officially belonged to her, she stood before another wall of glass, the skyline bowing to her quiet reign. Her ringtone broke the stillness. It was her mother-in-law's number, the woman who once adored her, who treated her like the daughter she never had. A pause, then she answered. "You ruined him," the woman sobbed without greeting. "He's lost his job, his accounts. They froze my retirement funds, everything." Her chest tightened. That was never part of the plan. She hadn't meant for innocent people to get caught in the collapse he triggered. "I didn't freeze your accounts," she replied softly. "His fraud investigations did that. Your pensions are secure, they always were." There was silence on the other end, a fragile, searching silence, as though the older woman didn't recognize the person speaking. The heiress who had been invisible was now undeniable. "Why didn't you tell us who you really were?" the mother asked finally, voice trembling. "Because I wanted to know who loved me without a reason," she whispered. "And now? And now I know." The call ended with no resolution, just a quiet understanding that love and truth often walk opposite directions to survive. That afternoon, the media exploded. Headlines spiraled across every business channel. Hidden heiress emerges CEO, falls in scandal. Unknown power player takes control of empire. Her photograph, a candid capture from the boardroom hallway, circulated everywhere. For years, she'd been the ghost in the room, the quiet wife people overlooked. Now she was a titan. Analysts debated her acquisition strategy, investors praised her discretion, and employees toasted to the woman who had saved the company from a man whose ambition had turned corrosive. She had become a legend overnight, but legends feel loneliness deeper than ordinary people. Late into the night, she returned home to the apartment that still smelled unfamiliar. She set aside her heels, poured herself a glass of red wine, and allowed the weight of everything to sink into her bones. Power could build walls thicker than heartbreak ever could. Her assistant sent a final report for the day. His accounts formally drained of her wealth, the penthouse repossessed, the cars and assets returned to the companies that owned them. Everything he believed he owned had simply reverted back to its rightful place. The mistress? She vanished the moment the money did. He was alone. Meanwhile, she stood on the balcony, wind brushing her hair, the moon a silent witness. She told herself this wasn't revenge, it was release. She hadn't ruined him. She had simply removed the invisible scaffolding that held him upright. If he had been a good man, he would have still stood tall. Instead, he crumbled. The next day, as she attended investor meetings and oversaw new restructuring plans, he wandered the streets of the city he once conquered. His suit wrinkled, his confidence leaking through the cracks. He searched for someone to blame. In the reflection of a store window, he barely recognized the man staring back. He called friends. Most didn't answer. Those who did made excuses. Connections, it turned out, were shallow when power evaporated. He returned to his parents' home that evening, only to find them distressed, confused by letters from banks they didn't understand. In his hollowed-out pride, he went to the only person who might listen. She was leaving the office when he appeared, disheveled, eyes red with rage and desperation. The security team stiffened, but she raised a hand to stop them. He stood there, breath heavy, voice raw. "I loved you," he said. "You think any of this changes that?" She looked at him long, seeing not a monster, but a man who had chosen to become one. "You loved what you thought I could give you," she answered. "You loved power, until you learned it wasn't yours." His fist clenched. "You think you're better than me now?" A sad smile touched her lips. "I was always your equal. You just never bothered to see it." He stepped closer, voice shaking. "You ruined my life." "No," she said. "You built a life made of lies. I just stopped holding it up." Her calmness terrified him more than anger ever could. Before he could speak again, her car arrived. She turned away, signaling this chapter was closing. As she entered the car, she whispered to herself the truth she had once been too afraid to believe. Power revealed who deserved to stand beside it. He never did. The door shut with a gentle click. Quiet, final. She didn't look back. Months passed. The world moved on, but he couldn't. The name that once commanded attention now drew whispers, pity, and headlines of disgrace. Every attempt to rebuild collapsed under the shadow of what he'd done. Former allies avoided him, recruiters declined politely, and investors never returned his calls. His reputation was radioactive, burned by greed, scorched by arrogance. He lived in a small rented room above a mechanic shop on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by reminders of the life he'd lost. His suit hung by the window like a relic of arrogance, collecting dust. The mistress was gone, vanished when the last dollar did. The silence was heavier than loneliness. It was the sound of consequence. Across town, her world flourished. Under her leadership, the conglomerate transformed into a symbol of innovation and integrity. The press called her the invisible hand-turned powerhouse. Women in boardrooms invoked her name like a legend. A reminder that quiet strength could move mountains without thunder. She didn't chase revenge or fame. She chased progress. The empire she rebuilt carried her name now, no longer hidden behind aliases or anonymity. Still, some nights she found herself staring at the city skyline, thinking of what her grandfather once told her. Power is truth wearing a quiet face. She finally understood what he meant. Her grandfather hadn't given her an empire to rule. He'd given her a mirror to see who would stand beside her when she seemed powerless. Her phone buzzed one evening, an unfamiliar number. She almost ignored it until instinct told her otherwise. Hello? Silence, then a voice, weary and familiar. It's me. She didn't ask how he got her number. Why are you calling? I just wanted to see you, he said. One last time. For a long moment, she said nothing. The ache in his voice wasn't anger anymore. It was emptiness. Against reason, she agreed. The next afternoon, she arrived at a downtown cafe near the park, one she used to love for its quiet simplicity. She spotted him immediately, sitting outside with a coffee he couldn't afford, his once polished hands trembling around the paper cup. His hair was unkempt, his eyes sunken. The fall from pride to poverty had carved humility into his face. He rose awkwardly when he saw her, part shame, part hope. You came. I said I would. He studied her, the poise, the elegance, the serenity. She was radiant in a way he had never noticed before. It wasn't wealth. It was peace. I've lost everything, he said quietly. My company, my home, my friends. Even my parents are ashamed. You didn't lose them, she replied. You traded them for illusions. He looked down. I thought I was building something real. You were, she said softly. But you built it on borrowed ground. For a long while they sat in silence. The world around them moved indifferent. Finally, she reached into her bag and placed an envelope on the table. Inside are job listings, references, and an account with enough to start again. It's not charity, she said. It's a choice. You can rebuild or you can repeat. What you do next will show if you've truly learned. He looked at the envelope like it burned. Why are you helping me? Because mercy isn't weakness, she said, and revenge that ends in hate only imprisons both sides. Tears filled his eyes, not from gratitude but from the realization that she had beaten him in every way that mattered. She had power, dignity, compassion, the things he had mistaken for fragility. I'm sorry, he whispered, voice cracking. I know, she said, but sorry doesn't rebuild what arrogance destroyed. She stood to leave, the late afternoon sun glinting off her earrings like fire. He looked up at her, desperate for something. Redemption, forgiveness, a reason to matter again. You loved me once, he said quietly. I did, she replied, and that love built the world you broke. Her driver opened the car door. She hesitated for a moment, then looked back. Take the chance or stay where you are. That's your story to finish now. When she left, he didn't follow. He sat there staring at the envelope, realizing it wasn't money she'd given him. It was the mirror he'd refused to face. Weeks later, she attended a charity gala, her name announced among philanthropists and industry leaders. Cameras flashed, investors shook her hand, and the night hummed with admiration. But her thoughts drifted not to victory, but to balance, to the fine line between power and peace. She had learned that strength wasn't in what she controlled, but in what she could let go of. In the months that followed, she met someone new, an architect, gentle and grounded, who loved her not for her name or her wealth, but for her quiet laughter. Together, they built a home filled with sunlight and honesty, the kind of life that didn't need to hide behind secrecy or pride. And somewhere across the city, he worked quietly at a small firm, rebuilding his life piece by piece. Some nights he'd see her face in newspapers or on billboards and feel the old ache of regret, but also something new. Respect. He would never fully recover from losing her, but perhaps that was the lesson. Some losses are meant to teach, not to torment. Years later, their paths crossed once more, briefly at a charity event. No anger, no bitterness, just two people who had once shared a storm, now standing under clear skies. She smiled at him, warm, distant, complete. He nodded, humbled. As she walked away, he realized that her revenge had never been destruction. It was revelation. And in that revelation, she became not the woman he betrayed, but the legacy he could never forget.